In this episode of the Intimate Marriage Podcast, I'm going to share an interview with you that Leah Vachani did where she was interviewing me because I was an expert speaker on a summit she hosted called Over 40 and Fabulous. I really loved our conversation. It's really in-depth, nuanced, tender, expansive, inspirational, and I think it's really going to speak to you as you anticipate growing and nurturing your own marriage over 40 as you become more fabulous by choice. That's the thing. Over 40, there's no like casual luck that we just become wonderful. We need to choose it. We need to put attention on ourselves and on our relationship. And then we get to reap the rewards for the rest of our lives. So I invite you to enjoy this conversation. I do just want to add the caveat that the Over 40 and Fabulous Summit has already passed. So even though you'll hear reference to it and a little conversation about it, just let that go. I'm sharing this with you so that you can really enjoy the conversation that we had. Marriage, intimacy, passion, self-expression when you're over 40 and fabulous. So here we go with the interview.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Over 40 and Fabulous Summit. What your doctor isn't telling you about menopause and how to reclaim your mood, sleep, energy, and waistline. I am Leah Vachani, your holistic health and hormone coach, and I have yet another amazing woman, amazing expert speaker for you guys today. So listen up as I introduce her, and then also, as per usual, all of our experts have just incredible free gifts for you guys watching. So stay tuned to the end. Dr. Stockwell has an amazing one for you too. All right. So without further ado, Alexandra Stockwell, aka the Intimacy Doctor, is widely known for her ability to catalyze immediate and profound shifts in high-achieving couples who want it all genuine emotional connection, sensual passion, and erotic intimacy. A physician, coach, and intimate marriage expert, Dr. Alexandra is the best-selling author of Uncompromising Intimacy, host of the Intimate Marriage Podcast, creator of the Aligned and Hot Marriage Program, as well as a wife of 28 years and mother of 4. Couples who work with her discover the key to passion, fulfillment, intimacy, and success isn't compromise. It's being unwilling to compromise. Because when both people feel free to be themselves, the relationship is juicy, erotically alive, and deeply nourishing. Wow, Dr. Alexandra, welcome.
Thank you. And thank you for feeling my biography so well.
Well, ladies, I have to admit, I've known Dr. Alexandra for a while now, and I know that she's a rock star. I know that, just having 4 children alone to me is already raising the bar on your status of incredible woman, like / superwoman. But I also know that she's helped a lot of women. We actually live locally in the same community, and so many women are grateful for her services and what she has to offer, that I was just really grateful that you came on and are willing to share more with this larger audience. So thank you, Dr. Alexandra.
I'm so glad to be here. And I think what we're talking about today is incredibly important. And most women either don't feel ready to talk about it, or even if they do theoretically, don't really know how to talk about it, because the only places people are really talking about sex and intimacy are either like super dry and clinical, which actually is not very often the experience, or porn, or places where it's also euphemistic, rom-coms, religious institutions. It's just rare to be able to have a straightforward conversation where it feels like we're talking about it, but we're doing it in language that isn't crass. I mean, I'm fine with crass, but it's totally unnecessary to really be able to talk about our experiences and how to make them better for both ourselves and our partner.
We're talking about the myth of libido mismatch. finding joy and pleasure with intimacy and sex in menopause. And nothing is off the table here. We're going to talk about it all. So if you're ready for that, let's go.
Exactly.
So, Dr. Alexandra, why don't you just I read your bio, but why don't you tell us a little bit more of what I didn't touch on about your background?
Okay, well, I studied philosophy and math in college, and then I went to medical school. I met my husband the first week, and really during the first 10 years of medical school and then training and early practice, which also was when we had our first two children, we got married and we were definitely in love, but our real focus was our career and our children. And yes, we had sex, but I tend to call it functional sex, meaning, all the right things happened, but afterwards I didn't necessarily feel closer to him and I didn't feel more distant. It just like didn't function the way the poets speak about. And I always assumed that once we had more time together, because we loved one another and were aligned in all kinds of important ways in terms of financial decisions and parenting and so forth, that supportive of one another's careers, that when we had more time together, then the romance, the passion, the sort of erotic flirtation and gratification, which is naturally blossomed because we were drawn to one another. And fast forward, neither of us were working evenings, and he was off most weekends. I was off all weekends. We, at that point, had maybe 3 children, but no one in diapers. They all were sleeping through the night, and we had more time. And I discovered that actually that didn't really change that much. And so this was a hard realization that I tend to encapsulate by saying, when it comes to pleasure and sharing bodies and feeling just delicious and alive, more time is definitely not enough. And loving one another is not enough. Those are great things to have. But for most couples, that's not enough to ignite the spark, keep the spark alive, reignite the spark, whatever the situation is. And so for me, I might have tolerated it a long time. I have to say, we could put up with a lot. But my parents were divorced, my husband's parents were divorced, and there was something about a pleasant, dehydrated marriage that I just didn't want to be my 4 children's legacy. And so I didn't want to wait until we were empty nesters to put attention on this. I didn't want to wait until I was in menopause, quite frankly, because I thought I only have so many years with my children at home. I bet, I don't even know if this is possible. I didn't know anyone who found their way back to one another and really heated up the bedroom. So I ended up taking a sabbatical and doing a number of different things, and eventually did a really in-depth sex and intimacy training for myself and my marriage. However, it doubled as a coach training. So there were lay people and people training to help others. And at the time, I really didn't know anything about what a coach was. That was not my motivation at all. I didn't pay any attention to any of the information about that part of the program. But I was really interested in educational models. So when I was there, I went to the first teaching lab, just like, how do they teach this? And to my complete surprise, me, a woman who never discussed sex with my mother until I'd had 2 children, who would have blushed at, I would have had my screen off for this conversation for sure, and mostly listened. I really was not the way I am now. I just felt completely at home. And so it wasn't instant, but I rearranged my life and have grown really comfortable. My own marriage, I consider it extraordinary. I mean, we are not necessarily super acrobatic. There are certainly health parameters that I could improve, but our intimacy is deeply nourishing, and that is also true for the hundreds and hundreds of couples I've coached and the many thousands more who've learned from my book and my podcast and interviews like this.
Wow. That was inspiring. Really inspiring. I'm glad that you shared that you weren't always like this too, because sometimes we see experts are like, "Oh, they're perfect. They have it all together. They've always been this way." No, it was a journey. It was a
It
journey.
was a journey. And, because my parents were divorced and my husband's parents were divorced, I was never sure that we would have a relationship like this. One of the very real possibilities when we got married was that we would get divorced because I hadn't really seen it done except where there was such deep compromise. Like my grandmother gave up her job, which she absolutely loved, teaching French in the local high school, because her husband wanted her to, is the short version. My grandfather was a wonderful person and they had a great marriage, but it was contingent on my grandmother giving up certain things. So anyway, I just really didn't know what was possible. But at this point, from where I stand now, as a 55-year-old woman, married for 28 years, having coached really just many, 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 many couples over more than a decade of serving in this way, without a doubt, having a fantastic relationship, and I mean all aspects, communication, affection, erotic activity, like the whole thing. Having a fantastic relationship is a learnable skill. And so for anybody listening, if there's any part of your relationship, or for that matter, your life, if you're not happy with it, then learn how to change that, because there's very little that has to stay the way it is. And that is certainly true when it comes to the culture and flavors between two people in a committed partnership.
Yeah, I agree. Well, I want to dive right into
Okay.
a topic that I'm sure many women watching right now are experiencing, and that is called the libido mismatch, is what it's, I think you coined that term. In general, you're going to explain that what that is, right? But in general, the feeling of women over 40, their peri or their menopause, and they just feel like maybe their husband or their partner wants it, and they're like, I'm just not, my libido is not the same. It's menopause, it's age. Let's dive into that.
Okay, so I just want to honor the women because there are many, and we're talking in heteronormative relationships here. This applies across the board, but I'm going to continue to talk in a heteronormative context. There are many women who are turned on and feel like in their prime in terms of sexual energy and sexual desire. And there, the libido mismatch is that their men are saying no, either overtly or just avoiding it, or end up in the other part of the house or come home late from work or whatever. And that is a phenomenon. It's not the one we're going to address today, but I want to honor that definitely happens. That libido mismatch plays out differently when it's the woman with the throbbing libido and the man who's avoiding sex. But there are amazing solutions for that too. But the much more common, and certainly like more often whispered about in locker rooms and memes on social media and so forth, is that women lose interest. And so you have this man who's craving sex, who's craving feeling loved in the way that is only available when his woman is willing to have and wanting to have sex with him. Men who are craving that she desires him. And you're a woman and you're like, you've had sex and it's just not appealing. It might hurt. It just, libido really is around wanting to have it. So first of all, there are actual anatomical considerations. If there's pain during sex, if there's a trauma that needs attention in order for you to relax in your body, like there are a lot of very specific considerations that I'm not going to go into now because they do exist, but not as often as people think, because we tend to hide around, well, it's my hormones, Actually, let me just define libido mismatch. You did, but I'm just going to say it very technically that libido really describes our desire for sex, our desire for intimate sexual erotic activity. And when there's a mismatch, one person wants it and the other doesn't. And the reason that I'm saying it in those terms is because in my mind, when I hear that a woman has low libido, the very first thing that I think, and again, there are medical circumstances that make this not true 100% of the time, but it's true enough that it's worth our having this conversation, that the main thing that I think is that what's being offered doesn't appeal to her. So if I'm talking to a man who's really frustrated because his woman isn't interested, I am going in strong that he needs to improve what he's offering, how he's offering, and what he's offering. But where we're talking to women, you may have never had sex. That's worth waking up and wanting more of. You may have never had the kind of sex that leaves a glow on your face that you can't imagine another woman like having low libido because it was so worthwhile. Of course you would want more of it. Or maybe you've had that in the past and you just can't imagine getting there again. And so it's not interesting. So first of all, I have compassion. That is the state of most women 40 and beyond. It's why approximately 50% of women over 50 aren't having sex. It's because they can't imagine that it would become worthwhile for them to want it. But let me also say that the women who are having sex and find a way for it not just to be a matter of duty and responsibility as a wife, women don't sexually peak until our 60s and 70s. There are so many incredible experiences available if we learn how to have them. So I want to talk about how to do that, but let me stop for a moment so this can be a dialogue.
Oh, I have so many questions now.
Well, go ahead.
Well, I mean, first, an observation, that's incredibly amazing that we don't peak sexually until our 60s or 70s. So I did not know that, and that's making me very inspired.
Let me just say that on my podcast, the Intimate Marriage Podcast, I looked this up for someone recently. So I think it's number 76. It's definitely in the 70s. I interviewed a couple, and at the time of the interview, they'd been married for 51 years. And they said that they'd always had a healthy sex life, but she went on to say, 51 years into marriage, that her orgasms were the best of her life and getting better and better.
Wow, that's incredible. All right, ladies, we've only just begun.
Yes, and I don't want to just leave that as a cliffhanger in case we don't come back around, because I said to her, I believe it. That's magnificent. I'm 55. I don't have any personal experience of sex in my 70s. Give me 20 years and then I can talk about that, but I can't yet. So I asked her, well, how do you account for that? And her answer was, I'm allowing more pleasure. I've learned how to allow more pleasure. And that's an important piece of our conversation too, but please go ahead with your next question.
Probably, and I'm trying to speak for the majority of women here. How do we get there? I know this is a very open question.
That's the question I hope you ask, because that's what I want to answer. It's
let's
okay,
go there.
great, this is possible, but this is not a Pollyanna pie in the sky approach. This really, if you want great sex, if you want passion, intimacy, erotic aliveness, here's the recipe. The first part starts with you, and then the second part includes a partner. And I don't mean masturbation. It can be that, but that's not where I'm headed with this. But I just want to talk about the two elements distinctly. So the first thing, it really gets at what Ruth Sharon, this woman I interviewed, said about allowing more pleasure, because especially for those of us who are educated, competent professionals, certainly mothers who make it all happen. There's so many personal and professional contexts in which the way to success, the way to accomplish our goals, the way to be rewarded by those around us is to override our feelings and, if I may say so, make shit happen. Like, to become a physician, you have to learn to work with no sleep and, tons of stress. And that's true of any mother too. And certainly working mothers, like whatever your context is, life gets so stressful, and we don't just like take a nap in the afternoon, or, I mean, maybe you go to the spa, but sometimes going to the spa, it's like you have to make sure it all happens. There is an art to turning off our phones and really relaxing. And either way, we're not going to be there 7 days a week. So the most important thing is to learn to feel. And by learning to feel, I'm referring to both emotions and also sensations, like the physical sensations connected with our five senses. So the first step in enjoying sex more, and therefore wanting it more, is being able to enjoy what your body is experiencing in a day-to-day way that is not overtly erotic at all. Like, it's March in California for you and me in Northern California, and we're just like teetering on the edge of the weather where we could go sit outside on a park bench and just feel the sun caress our face. So if you have a few moments, you could go sit on a bench and scroll on your phone. You could think about all the things you need to do. You could even watch the birds flitting around, which can be a very fulfilling experience too, in terms of the visuals, or even if you hear it tweet, it can sound beautiful. But how often do you just like close your eyes and feel the sun caress your face? Or when you're eating, allow it to be such a sensually delicious experience rather than just a functional experience, get it in. Or even if you don't rush through eating and you're not watching something while you eat, I'm really talking about the act and the art of bringing your attention back into your own body. It is a kind of mindfulness, but often mindfulness is associated like with being zen and kind of disconnected from what's happening around you. And so I don't tend to use the word mindful, even though that is what I'm talking about, because I'm talking about paying attention to the feel of the fabrics that you're wearing and how much weight your earrings have, so that it feels nice to be reminded as you, twist your head back and forth, but it's not too heavy that it's uncomfortable. Or what size heel, or what kind of aroma would you enjoy? I remember coaching a couple. It was exactly this kind of situation. Her husband was this wonderful man. They had 3 daughters. He was into those daughters and into his wife and really loved having sex. And she had no interest. And so when I said to her, "What brings you pleasure during the day?" she couldn't think of anything until she said, "I love coffee." So my assignment to her, I think her husband was like, "We came to talk about sex and this is the assignment," but it absolutely was the next step for her, was to give herself time to enjoy her cup of coffee in the morning, to pick the mug that felt good in her hand with the right weight, just the lip. We all have a favorite mug for like how it feels when she poured it, to like enjoy the arc and the sound of the liquid being poured into the cup, let the aroma fill her, and just thoroughly enjoy Enjoy the way the coffee makes love to her if she lets it. And otherwise, it's just the functional ingestion of something warm that, is gone in a moment. So that's really the first step. Obviously, I could talk about this in many ways, if you're with an animal, paying attention to the fur, but not only having attention, like if you rub the back of your cat's neck, let's just say, not just like for the cat, but how does that feel to you? We all will feel more lit up, more creative, more embodied, and more open to all kinds of desires and relational connection when there is more pleasure in our day.
I can 100% hear what you're saying. And in our day and age, with all the distractions, what I heard you say was basically having a sensual experience where you are open and connected, open to receiving, open to acknowledging.
Yes, exactly. And I described this moment in my book that was so significant for me when my four kids, we lived in a house at that time with, like, it was one room, the living room and the kitchen. It was all open, and the kids were just, loud and at it. And I was just so annoyed and resentful. And my husband was coming home late, and I was sauteing onions. And I remember just noticing that I was like, like I had a wooden spoon and a frying pan and the onions and the oil, and I'm like shoving it around because I just was so, I was like so annoyed and just so pissy. And I realized everything was going to be the same if I allowed myself to stir those onions instead of it being like a place to express frustration. What if I access something else? And so I started moving my hips, and like I let myself enjoy the sound of the onions and certainly the smell. And it's like nothing changed except for me, which changed everything. And I found that when I made that change, essentially choosing pleasure instead of pissiness in that moment, my children ended up being a lot calmer, and preparing dinner felt satisfying. It really, this moment, sauteing the onions, was a pivotal moment for me. And I had these like frumpy aprons, and I replaced them with basically French made aprons, but functional. So they actually covered me. And I identified all the moments, the kinds of moments in my day that were super annoying for me, and looked at, well, what could I add to them that would make them pleasurable? Like a little bit of scent in the kitchen before I start cooking, or maybe particular music as I'm trying to get the kids into all the car seats. Like there are various, that's when this change happened for me. If I think of more current, like moments now, I think the idea is clear. I don't need to give more examples, but the point is like, if you're pissy or you're just kind of numb, which as far as I'm concerned, they're equivalent, because in both cases, you're wasting time when you could feel delicious, you could feel lovely, you could feel pleasure. Look at your day from start to finish. When are the moments that are particularly disconnecting for you or irritating? And then consider if what you have available are your five senses, your sight, your hearing, taste, touch, and smell. Which of those do you want to use to create more pleasure in those moments? And we haven't really talked about sex yet, but I just want to say that as human beings, there is no magical switch that gets flipped when we get to the bedroom, especially in a long-term committed relationship. You can sometimes have a one-night stand that's wonderful, that's totally out of character. It's not common, but it's certainly possible. But when you're living with someone day in and day out, however you're moving through your day, however you're interacting with one another, that's not going to suddenly change just because your clothes are off. So, put differently, everything which isn't sex is functioning like foreplay and either bringing you closer together or further apart, to opening your heart or closing it down, either a lot or a little, to feeling alive in your body or feeling dead in your body. And if you take your clothes off and lie down in bed, that is not the time to start to feel wonderful and open and full of desire. That is the time to appreciate that you've been feeling that way. And so you're bringing that way into the bedroom too.
That was powerful. So now we understand that we have a choice. We have a choice to choose pleasure or to choose pissy or pain or whatever the other is. So now that we've empowered ourselves with that choice, what comes next?
Okay, so what comes next? I want to set it up by talking about uncompromising intimacy. That's the name of my book. And the context for what I mean by that starts with the fact that really throughout the Western world, the most common relationship advice that's given to everyone is that if you want a great relationship, you have to be good at compromise. Compromise is what makes for a happy marriage. And it's just not true at all. What compromise does is create a conflict-free, pleasant, bland companionship at best. And if you want sexual desire, libido, passion, intimate connection, then uncompromising intimacy is what actually will get you there. When I say the word compromise, what I mean is that you withhold your desires, you withhold what's happening inside you. It can also be challenges, your genuine experience. You withhold that so that your partner is more comfortable, so that your partner isn't challenged, doesn't feel inadequate, doesn't get angry, whatever it is. But in doing that, we leave important parts of ourselves outside of the relationship. And again, there isn't some magic switch that we can bring our whole selves and be ready to just be fully expressed and lose ourselves in one another's bodies in the bedroom, when outside of the bedroom, we're like leaving parts of us at the door before we come home. So uncompromising intimacy is really the art, the ongoing evolving practice of getting to know yourself and learning how to share the truth of who you are with your partner in a way that they can receive it and meet you there, and ideally share themselves as well. So what does that mean? What that means is, first of all, if you have a habit of faking orgasm, just stop. That is training your partner to do things that don't actually feel good to you, training your partner to misinterpret your signals, your physiological signals. So it's essential to stop that. And if you're not excited to have sex, it doesn't matter how often, you don't need to be like rabbits multiple times a day. That's not what I'm talking about. But if you just aren't interested in sex, then it's time to increase the pleasure in your life in the way, like sensual pleasure in the way that I've talked about. And it's also time to be honest with your partner and not blaming them, not saying they should have known better, not being critical, not pointing to inadequacy. None of that is going to lead to more libido and intimate connection. But with real vulnerability, to basically say, you know, I love this part of our life and this part of our life, like whatever it is that has you together that you do enjoy. And I'd love for our time in the bedroom to be just as good. I haven't spoken up and I've held us back because how would you have known? But I do want to tell you now, are you open to hearing it? And let the conversation be as short or as long as feels right. You want it to be successful because it's not a one and done kind of conversation. And if, for example, maybe he is too goal oriented, too like focused on getting to orgasm, that it is a turn off. Or maybe you feel embarrassed that it takes you a while to orgasm and you feel badly that he has to work so hard. Like whatever it is, and that's just like two of loads of options, whatever your experience is, think about it and have the courage to share it in this generous way and notice my tone. It's soft, it's relatively slow. It makes it much easier to hear what you're saying. And the conversation benefits tremendously from starting with, I want us both to have more fun together, or I want this intimate part of our life to be as good as we are with, this or that, whatever the way we love food and fine dining, or, the way we are so aligned with our financial choices. I want to bring some of that into the bedroom. And if you set up the conversation that way, then you're really overtly and indirectly conveying you're on the same team. Like this is a partnership and you're going to co-create better and better experiences together. That's a very different vibe than I haven't been happy in the bedroom for years. What is a good guy supposed to do with that except feel terrible and shut down or get defensive and really angry you haven't said so before? No. But with that same reality, you say, I love our life together. And there's something that it's been so awkward for me to talk about. And so I've avoided it for years. But I'm feeling like we love one another so much. I'm willing to find the courage to have a conversation about how we touch one another so together we can discover what's going to really be best for both of us. Those two communications that I just modeled, I meant to convey the exact same scenario in the marriage, but two completely different approaches in how to handle it. And one is the opening to a realm of all kinds of things, and the other is really just going to lead to more of the same, except you've had a really awkward, painful, uncomfortable conversation too. So there's a great deal to say about like what is literally happening in the bed or wherever it is that you're touching one another, but it's actually premature to focus on, how to touch the clitoris and how much pressure and, all those things, which are great conversations, until this landscape is really established. That conversation isn't going to get you what you want, or like learning about new positions or even getting new sex toys if you don't first put attention between you and your senses to experience more pleasure, to just like, feel good every day. Well, that is going to lead to the kinds of conversations, which then lead to the kinds of focus on the technical know-how. But in my experience, it still surprises me how often couples think, oh, it's about the technique, and it turns out it's not. Once they can really embody uncompromising intimacy, bring all of themselves to the conversation, well, to the relationship, and not avoid these conversations that are really important if you're touching one another, that somehow once that block in communication falls away, people become a little bit more courageous, a little bit more exploratory, and a little bit more competent with their touching. And of course, they can always learn more.
So what I'm hearing is 100% intention before mechanics, intention of open, honest conversation, open, honest with yourself, open, honest with your partner. I can also imagine that I'm guessing since we're talking about the woman and the man in this scenario, I bet the man is almost relieved in many instances to hear the woman opening up and being vulnerable and sharing her honesty.
So long as he doesn't feel attacked. And
Right.
men feel attacked way more often than women appreciate. In fact, I have a daughter and 3 sons, and my older 2 sons are 25 and 18. So they're men for certain purposes. And so I have learned with my husband and my older sons that if they get shut down or their tone gets a little snarky, anything like that, one of the first things I say is, do you feel attacked? And pretty much the answer is yes. And I haven't known that I was being attack-esque or that I was attacking, but I can tell they felt attacked. And it doesn't matter if I think they shouldn't. I think it's not justified. If I don't actually work with the fact that they feel attacked, we're not going to make progress in our conversation anyway. And I do want to just tell a story. It's not the story where the man was the proactive one for sex, but it really gets at a bunch of these issues. It was a couple, one of the first couples I coached. She was a physician and he was an engineer. They both had full careers. They had 2 children. And when they reached out, they've been married, I think, about 20 years. And when they reached out to me, they hadn't had sex in 9 months. And so the first few sessions, I focused really on helping them rebuild the rapport between them because they had basically stopped hanging out when it was just the 2 of them. You know, once all the kids were in bed, they were in different rooms watching different shows kind of situation. So just to rebuild the rapport, and also in the way that I've been speaking about in terms of uncompromising intimacy, that each of them actually share what they were experiencing because they hadn't had that conversation. They had just stopped having sex. And so she, who was the one who was most concerned about this, had concluded that because she was menopausal, I think she was 48, and she had just concluded that he was no longer attracted to her. It was the only thing that she could figure out about why they had stopped having sex 9 months ago. And it was clear if they hadn't been working with me or somebody else, that it would have just continued on and on. There was no end in sight to this. And she was a very attractive woman, but she just thought, I'm getting older. This is the beginning of the end. He's no longer attracted to me. But she had never said that that was her concern, because she withheld so it wouldn't be uncomfortable. And when he heard that, he was like, honey, I think you're gorgeous. Like, it never would have crossed his mind that that's what she was thinking. And in fact, he'd had 1 or 2 times where he'd lost his erection, and he adored her so much that he couldn't bear how inadequate he felt when he didn't provide the pleasure that he wanted to provide her. And so rather than risk feeling inadequate, which was just so uncomfortable for him, he just avoided sex instead. And after a while of him continuing to decline or like walk away, not really answer, or just say no, she stopped asking because she was so hurt getting rejected. And as soon as he shared that no, actually, he was super motivated, but he just couldn't bear to feel inadequate. And she understood that she was so critical that he felt inadequate more than was necessary with whatever their experiences were. Anyway, once all of this was out in the open, so she was her whole self, including her concerns, and he was his whole self, including his concerns, that by 3 sessions, I was like, okay, now let's talk about what's happening in the bedroom. And they were already getting it on, feeling glorious because these blocks in being their whole selves were eliminated. They could laugh and they just naturally picked it up. And it's like emotional intimacy paves the way for erotic intimacy. And in my own practice, 80% of the time when there's libido mismatch of any kind, learning to deepen the emotional intimacy, to know yourself and be real about it and share that with your partner with an open heart and without a lot of criticism, that takes care of things. And then about 20, sometimes 25% of the time, I do get into the specifics of touch and what actually the techniques are. But that's much less common when we're talking about a long-term committed relationship where they are devoted to continuing the relationship and they just need to be able to be who they really are. We're talking about authenticity, body, soul, and spirit.
Wow, that was a powerful share. And I think I'm going to have to watch this all again because it was so juicy, so good. Dr. Stockwell, I know our time is coming to a close here, but I want to give you a chance also to offer a free gift to the audience watching.
If what we've been talking about speaks to you, I really think you're going to love the first chapter of my book, Uncompromising Intimacy, where I talk about the 4 different types of relationships and what needs to happen if you're in any of the 3, which are variations on disconnection, in order to have more connection, intimacy, passion, and conscious partnership. So you can, it's not long and it's a very easy read, but if this interview spoke to you, then that first chapter is definitely going to speak to you. And if it speaks to you, then the rest of the book will be very worthwhile because it gives you all the tools to have the kind of connection that we've been speaking of.
Thank you. That's so generous. And for those of you wondering, that link will be in the email. That same, all the links are there. How you got here, go back to that email. The link will be there. And, you know, this was such a powerful conversation. We women don't talk, in my experience, many women don't talk enough about this. So if you found this conversation helpful, share it with a girlfriend that is maybe needing to hear this. So I can't thank you enough, Dr. Stockwell. This has been so much value. So grateful for your time.
Thank you. And thank you, everyone, for your interest. This is how we heat it all up again.
I think we're going to need a part 2 for what happens next, too. So hopefully in the future, we'll have you back here.
I would love that. I would love that. Thank you so much, Leah.